Hello and welcome to the newest episode of the New Year's Six podcast. Today I'll be wrapping up my real team previews. Already did all the conference previews, so we're just left with the independent schools. So only a few of them left. Wrap up my team previews for the 2023 season. And since there's only four, I want to add something onto this video, kind of get us all excited for the next season. And with that in mind, I'm going to go week by week and try to predict either the spot of College Gameday or the overall game of the week as a whole. So a little bit extra this week just due to the fact there's only four independent squads. And ready to get this season started. We're about 10 days away from right now. So with that in mind, I'll kick us off. Same format as before, starting at the bottom of the quote-unquote conference, making my way up to the top, and then trying to pick out a breakout player on both offense and defense that I think is due for a big year. When it comes to the independents, there's no real first or last, so I'm just going to go in order of record. The team that I think is most likely to have the best record at the end, team that I think is going to have the worst record at the beginning. But again, no conference standings, all play different types of opponents, and you don't get a trophy at the end, for being 9-3 and winning the quote unquote independent group. But looking at the first team on this list here, team that I think has universally struggled at the FBS level. Not a whole lot's going to change this year. Going to struggle again at a pretty high level, and that, of course, is going to be UMass. Don Brown has his work cut out for him. Went 1-11 last year. Very legitimately could repeat that again this year. It's just I think pound for pound, UMass is one of, if not the worst team at the FBS level. Tried making that jump about a decade ago. Really hasn't paid off, but We'll see what it looks like, but not going to pay off this year. The offense and defense just they're pretty hit or miss across the board. There's no real easy way to play it. There's looking at the offense here, there's no top level talent and there's very little depth. I think the quarterback situation could be okay with here with Tayson Fomachan, and maybe he comes into his own as the starting QB at UMass. Maybe brings it together, for this team. The receiver room is okay. Mark Pope is good enough to be your number one guy, but outside of him, I don't see any real elevated talent outside of that. Could be wrong, but for what I've seen, it's not there. But I think the running back room is probably the biggest question mark on this team. It's a multiple pro style offense, so having that consistent running game, especially for a team like UMass, which struggles, is going to be paramount to their success this year. So with that in mind, the breakout player I'm going to take for UMass is Kayron Adams. Really limited stat line last year, limited playing time. Picked up a touchdown against New Mexico State. Had a 65-yard game against Buffalo. So the types of teams that UMass should be beating, if they want to build their program up, should beat or should be competitive against. I don't know who UMass has on the schedule in terms of Power 5. I know they always have like an LSU or an Ole Miss on there just to get beat up on. But New Mexico State and Buffalo are teams they should be able to hang with. So if Adams has been able to do that against them already with another year under his belt, I'd love to see what he can do this year, especially if he becomes a focal point of this UMass offense and they become a ground and pound team. It may work to their favor as you kind of work out the QB room and the receiver room as they get more experience as well. So looking at Adams on offense to make that happen. Defense very similar. I think the D-line is actually all right. Billy Wooden is someone I think this UMass D-line can rely on, especially knowing that it alternates between a 4-3 and a 4-2-5 defense. The linebacker room is, again, I think they're okay. Really a pretty good dynamic duo of Gerald Johnson and Jerry Roberts. So, two guys that are playmakers in their own right, two guys that are able to, play aggressively, whether it's in pass coverage or in run coverage. So I'm not too worried about the linebacker group. I think the D-line is all right. The DB room is the one I have the most questions about, because they do have a few playmakers back there, but they're lacking the depth in my eyes to elevate this program. Tyler Rudolph is a pretty good safety in his own right. Jordan Mahoney is a potential lockdown corner for this team, but the player I'm looking at is going to come from this DB room, someone who comes in as a transfer, hasn't found the field at his previous program, and is looking to make an impact for himself, and that's Steven Ortiz. So comes down from Minnesota, never really played, and if he did, it would have been on special teams. 4-star recruit in the class of 21, and I just look at how big that is for UMass, knowing that when they recruit, 4 and 5 stars are off limits to UMass. It just doesn't happen. Maybe you get a few 3 stars here and there, but it's a team built on the guys who have been overlooked, and Ortiz has been overlooked at Minnesota. So if he's able to come down to Amherst, live up to that potential, and make a name for himself, the DB room back there could be lights out. I think it's a big opportunity for Ortiz, youngest guy on this defense, one of 2 sophomores out there. And, this is that opportunity, and this is that chance to make something happen if you're him. So, I'm hoping that he takes his expertise and takes that time he spent up in Minnesota, figures out what works, what doesn't. Minnesota defense last year, I believe, was top 5 in scoring. So they're pretty locked down when they get down to it. So I hope he takes those lessons. I hope he takes the experiences and how he learned from the people up there in Minnesota, brings it to UMass, and makes a name for himself on this defense. So I look at Ortiz on defense, Adams on offense for a UMass team that, quite frankly, is still going to be at the bottom of the barrel when it's all said and done this year. But next up, I'm going to go with a team that kind of hovers around that middle ground. Did it last year, likely going to be there again this year. Just the kind of the model of consistency in the sense most years, sometimes they blip up, sometimes they blip down, but just about as average as a program you can have at this level, and that's going to be Army. Again, Army is not competing for national championships. They're not competing to break the ground or break records of anything. They're just running their things. They're doing what they need to do, and again, it's very similar to Navy, not quite like Air Force. Air Force, I think, has kind of taken a pretty substantial step up from both Army and Navy, but Army and Navy, again, just kind of a reflection of an older time. The way that they run triple options still, the way that they run their program. You don't have any 350-pound O linemen on this team. It's still got to be guys that can make it in the military. So I think Army is going to get right to around that expectation that they've set for themselves, and maybe surprise a few folks and get above that. But looking at the offense real quick, obviously with triple option, the run game is big, and that's no difference here. Stellar guys, Tyrell Robinson, Tyson Riley, just guys who can pick it up and get it going. But I think there's a lot of talent there. I think the receiver room is a little underrated. You don't think of Army having talented receivers, and the ones that they do barely play just because it's a run-heavy offense. I do think Isaiah Alston is a pretty legit number 1 guy. So I'm very curious how he's utilized this year. But the breakout player is going to come from the QB room, knowing that he's been used in again, more of like a backup RPO triple option type style, and that's going to be Bryson Daly. Has not completed a pass over the course of his collegiate career, but has had rushing opportunities, 79 yards and a TD against UMass, so team we've already covered tonight, and a 64-yard run against Louisiana Monroe. So again, like UMass, where those are the types of teams that they should be beating. These are the types of teams that Army should be beating. If you want to get back to bowl eligibility, you want to get into, first responder or military bowl or, any of those Army affiliated ones that they can jump to, it's going to take that QB, continuing to run. It's going to take Daly continuing to run at that level, but at the same time establishing a passing game. I don't expect 50 passes a game, but if you get 4 or 5 in there to mix it up and use that receiver talent, this could be a fun time to be a fan up there. But I think Daly's going to get it done. I think he's going to establish himself and really establish himself as the starter heading into next year. As that's his curtain call. But I think Daly has a big year for Army. Develops himself and takes those next steps as a passer and a runner. The defense is where I've got, let's say questions. The DB room I think is pretty solid. A lot of talent back there. Quindrellin Hammonds and Max DiDomenico, pretty strong 1-2 punch. They do have a talented corner back there in Jamari Moore, so I'm not worried about the DB unit. I am worried about the D-line, and I am worried about the linebacker group, and it is a 3-4 defense. So at least in my eyes, I think if Army's going to lose games this year, it's going to be because they can't stop anyone, especially up front. I'm just looking for who those talented players are. I'm looking for who those game changers are. I don't know who it is on the D line. In the linebacker room, I think it's Leo Lowen and Jimmy Ciarlo. But outside of that, I have my questions. The player I think who's going to break out is going to come from that linebacker room, and it's going to be Josiah Banks. So not a lot of info on the guy. Again, Army is a hard school for me to find information about. They don't redshirt kids. They don't recruit 24/7 ranked kids most of the time. And as a result, it's hard to find basic info on a lot of their players. So, with that in mind, haven't seen a lot from Banks yet, but we need to see it this year. We need to see him make that jump. We need to see that consistency. And, this is the year to do it. He is one of 3 juniors out there. Everyone else is a senior. Who is this team going to lean on next year when these guys are gone? It's going to be a guy like Banks. It's going to be him who steps up, makes plays and delivers. And I think that unknown factor about him could be used to his advantage, knowing that, people are going to focus more of their time on where's Lowen on the field, where's Ciarlo on the field, where's Nathaniel Smith on the D-line. If offenses plan around those players, maybe they leave Banks off their radar and he surprises. So that's what I think is going to happen. Banks emerges as a leader, as a playmaker, and that's the only way this defense evolves into who they could be. So I'm looking at Banks on defense, Daly on offense as your breakout players for an Army team that again will be pretty consistent and consistently average. So next up, these are our final 2 here of the independents. But this next team here is a team that took a pretty massive jump last year, and I expect that same consistency again this year. Obviously, they have the right guy for the coach. They have the right guy firing them up, and this is UConn. So Jim Mora came in, took over a program in UConn that wins usually between 1 and 2 games a year, and took them to a bowl game. Mora is that guy for UConn, and I expect more of the same from that this year. I think from an offensive perspective, they have a phenomenal receiver room. Cameron Ross is an amazing slot receiver. Kevin Clarcius is a strong receiver out on the X. I am not worried about the options out there. I think having Taquan Robertson, he could take a pretty big step forward as a QB this year with those options around him. So offensively, the receivers are there. The QB will follow suit. And the running back room is the one that I think is going to break out by virtue, and that's Devontae Houston. So in a sense, we've seen what types of games he's played so far. He picked up a touchdown last year against Syracuse, Fresno State, and UMass. So UMass is a game they should win. Year after year, especially with where they are now. Fresno State, can be tough. Syracuse, can be tough. So those are the types of performances you want to see out of your number one guy. Had a 135-yard game against FIU, a game that if you're UConn at this point, that needs to be a guarantee for you. So if he's hitting TDs against Power 5 opponents, high-level Group of 5 opponents, low-level Group of 5 opponents, and having a big game against FIU, that's a good indicator of what's to come for him. So I'm looking at Houston to make that move and put this together for a UConn team that can kind of, especially on offense, can do as they please. If they want to be pass heavy or run heavy, they can. But I think Houston evolving as a runner will spread it out, and as a result, create opportunities for everyone out there. On the defense, I think this is where UConn's going to win a lot of their games this year. This defense is legit. It's hard picking a breakout player because it's a very experienced and very talented group. The DB room is solid. Durante Jones, Malik Dixon-Williams, Chris Sheeran, Malcolm Bell. I'm so unfazed by how good they are at DB. I'm unfazed by how they are at linebacker. This may be even better. Jackson Mitchell, Eric Gilliand, Noah Plack. Again, just talented dudes from top to bottom. So you can't pick anyone from either of those groups. And the D line is just the same. And it's a 4-3 defense, so it's a very spread out and evenly dispersed defense. But Eric Watts on the end, his partner Price Yates on the other end, Dalmont Jourdain in the middle. Talent talent everywhere here. But I think the player that's going to break out, and this may be past UConn and maybe on potentially the national scale, is Jelani Stafford. So looking at what he did last year, mainly that game against Syracuse, a sack and 2 tackles is nothing to be embarrassed by. Picked him another sack over the course of the year against Fresno State. So what I want to see from him in that D tackle spot is doing having moments like that consistently. So just taking over and having if it was a 2-sack season last year, I want 5 this year. Evolve as a player, do it consistently against every type of opponent. Be that playmaker, force a fumble, do what you got to do. Hit the running back for a tackle for a loss. That's what I want to see. I think this UConn defense is going to be really good, but if there's a breakdown at any level, we could see problems. I think Stafford is going to be one of the potential younger guys. He is a junior, but one of the younger guys on this defense that can hold it together and emerge as your leader for the future. So I'm looking at Stafford on defense. I'm looking for Houston on offense as your breakout players for a UConn team that I don't know if they're going to get back to a bowl game. That is the goal for Jim Mora and company. And that leaves us with Notre Dame. So, obviously, year one for Marcus Freeman didn't go exactly how he wanted. A couple of bad losses over the course of the year. Lost to Marshall, lost to Stanford, losses to USC and Ole Miss, or not Ole Miss, Ohio State are not bad at all. So, if he ends up at 11-2 last year, we're having a very different conversation than 9-4. But I digress. Looking to shake off those year one bumps in the road and evolve as a team in year two. I think Notre Dame is going to be very good this year. They are going to be in the playoff picture. They are going to be ranked for the whole year. This is a very good Notre Dame team. And it starts with the offense. Having Sam Hartman in there at QB is huge. He is a clear step up for Notre Dame at the most important position on this team. So putting that together this year is gigantic. He's due for another huge year. He's the best quarterback in Wake Forest history. We saw all the things he did when he was down there, and he's going to look to cap off an amazing college career up at Notre Dame this year. Audric Estime, at running back is another electric piece to this offense. He's going to want 1,000 yards this year. And the offense should be able to score at will for the most part. Even the receiver room, which, again, has a little bit of youth as a result of some turnover, there's talent out here. There's Jaden Thomas out there. And that's probably your number one guy, but I want to see some depth develop. And the player I'm looking at to accomplish that depth is going to be coming from the tight end spot, and it's going to be Mitchell Evans. So obviously Michael Mayer off to the NFL after last year, and that tight end spot is empty, and it's going to be filled by a guy that's ready to make a name for himself. Picked up his first collegiate touchdown against South Carolina in their bowl game last year, 3-star recruit in the class of 21, and ready to make moves, ready to fill in that spot. Notre Dame does well with that tight end position. They make things happen, and Evans will be that next guy to inherit that spot. 3-star recruit in the class of 21, ready to make a name for himself and ready to use the weapons and the teammates that are out there with him. He's probably the most overlooked guy on this offense when you look at all of the all-stars around him. And I think they're going to use that to his advantage. I think it's a young receiver room, and Evans is going to be a substantial part in their development this year. And having an amazing quarterback like Sam Hartman with him is going to do wonders. The defense is where I have a little bit more of a concern because it's not as lights out as this offense looks like. Linebacker room looks pretty good. Can't complain when it's a 4-3 defense. And every linebacker back there knows their spot, has been there for now 5 years. J.D. Bertrand, Jack Kaiser, and Marist Lufau. So, no concern about the level of talent in the linebacker room. The D-line, I have some questions about, mainly the depth, because you have Howard Cross in that middle, but I'm nervous about the rest. I want to see who your number 2 and your number 3 are as the season progresses, because right now I don't know. Right now I know you got one good player in the middle, but I want to see the rest of that line step up. Kind of the same with the DB room. You do have some players out there. You do have mainly Cam Hart and DJ Brown, and as a whole, this is a very it's a very senior defense. I'm looking at the depth chart real quick. I'm only seeing 2 guys that aren't gone after this year. So, and they're both in the secondary. But, with that in mind, I'm very curious how this team evolves over the course of this year. And the breakout player I have is going to be at that nickelback spot in this DB room, and it's going to be Thomas Harper. So, this is a kid who comes in from Oklahoma State, one of those players that is part of that exodus out of Stillwater. Only notable play that I saw last year was an interception against Baylor, and I know that was not 21 Baylor that killed the Big 12, but again, it's still a Power 5 opponent. It's still the type of opponent that Notre Dame plays week in and week out for the most part. So I love to see what he does in a new defense, on a new campus, in a new culture, on a new team, and how he's going to put it together for this team. This is a DB room that is younger compared to the rest of the defense. They're going to need to rely on a guy like Harper to step up with these other older guys to make this thing happen. So I'm looking at Harper on defense. I'm looking at Evans on offense for a Notre Dame team that is going to be in the thick of it for the entire year. This is a top 15, top 10 Notre Dame team any way you look at it. And they're going to surprise a lot of people this year. I promise you that much. So, all right. So that concludes the wrap up for the independent teams. And since haven't been on for that long, let's go through the the game of the week for every week of the college season, and maybe try to predict where game day's heading. So starting off with week 0, I assume they're going to do this from the studio. Not too many headline games this week. But I'm going to do the top 5 for each week, starting with week 0. Number 5, FIU at Louisiana Tech. Again, not a whole lot of options to pick from, and I don't think they're heading down to Louisiana Tech. Hawaii at Vanderbilt. Maybe head to Nashville, cool environment, or cool city. But I don't see them heading down that way. Navy versus Notre Dame in Ireland. This is probably the most likely if we're thinking about it that way, just due to the new environment, the historic rivalry, everything along those lines. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Navy just doesn't have the team they need to be focused on, featured on TV. You got San Jose State at USC, and I don't think they're going to go out to Southern Cal. I think they're going to save that location for another week. Knowing with who's coming up on the schedule for them, that they're not going to blow the Coliseum on San Jose State. Sorry guys, but the game of the week, and if they are going to go to game day, this is where I think they should go, and this would be Ohio at San Diego State. Week 0 for me is an opportunity to highlight the group of 5 schools in particular. So much of the rest of the season is focused on who's going to make the playoffs, who's going to win the SEC, who's going to win the Big Ten. And teams like Ohio and San Diego State get overlooked in those conversations because they're not a part of them. So using week 0 as a chance to highlight them and see what they're about. San Diego State is a very strong group of 5 team. Ohio is a very strong group of 5 team. So giving them a chance and going out to San Diego State would be pretty massive for those programs. But I think they're going to do game day from the studio. But if you are going to watch a game that week, that's probably the best one to pick from a pure competitive standpoint. You don't have the brand names, but you have the across the board talent, which is higher than probably any game that I've listed off so far. So now heading into week 1, we do know where game day is, and it's confirmed to be heading to Charlotte, North Carolina for North Carolina versus South Carolina. That makes sense. Knowing that game day is only on Saturdays unless they do a week 1 on Thursday, but I don't plan on that. So, knowing that they only do Saturday games, every big game in week 1 is not on Saturday. I don't know how they did it this year, but looking at the list, Clemson at Duke, Monday. Going to be a competitive game, going to be a fun game, but not on Saturday. Nebraska at Minnesota, Thursday. Florida at Utah, Thursday. The game of the week, the most high-profile game they have, LSU versus Florida State, Sunday. So game of the week is going to be LSU versus Florida State. I think we know where game day's headed, but the reality is that I don't know how the schedule worked out this year, where you have all of these big games spread out, and unfortunately not a lot of highlights on that Saturday. And it is the best Saturday of the year, even though my team's not playing on it. It's still an amazing day across the country. So heading into week 2. We don't know where this one is yet, so this is the first kind of opportunity to predict. But starting off at 5, Notre Dame at NC State. I think it's a talented NC State team. I think they're being slept on by a lot of teams. Notre Dame, always a difficult schedule, always willing to play anywhere and anyone. So big brand may drive them down there. Texas A&M at Miami, so kind of the battle of the Who's Back Bowl. So Texas A&M, Miami, both very disappointing seasons last year. The game they played last year in College Station was actually very good. Would have been game day had Texas A&M not lost to Appalachian State. Could be a chance for them to go to Coral Gables in lieu of where they didn't go to College Station last year. Utah at Baylor, so Utah comes off that Florida game and heads right on the road to Waco. I think this is a very intriguing matchup between two talented teams, and very interested to see if this is the option. Oregon at Texas Tech. Oregon is a preseason favorite to make and or win the Pac-12. Texas Tech, I think, is a lot of people's sleeper pick, my own included. I think this is a very talented Texas Tech team. And how often do they go to Lubbock? It's an amazing environment. It's a great opportunity, and maybe they head out there. But I think we all know that they're not heading to any of those past four. It is going to be Texas at Alabama. They're heading to Tuscaloosa. So, I think that's the way it is. It's a top 15-10 matchup. I don't know where the AP poll came out today. I don't remember where they put Texas, but Alabama's in the top 5 at number 4. Texas is probably in the top 15 somewhere, but huge matchup, big opportunity. I was at the game in Austin last year, not going to Bama this year for that game, but I think it's a big time environment, and it's gonna. It's going to be revenge for either team coming out of last year, because Texas, was sour that they lost. Alabama sour that they didn't win by enough. So what are they going to do in Tuscaloosa? Time will find out. And just for clarification, I do have rules for where I pick game day to go. I don't pick any location more than once over the course of the season. I know they have done places like Georgia twice in a year or Ohio State twice in a year. I'm sticking with one location a year, and I will not do games featuring teams in back-to-back weeks. So Texas on the road for this week, which means I will not pick game day to go to Texas in week 3 if that's the game I would pick. So just to spread the field out a little bit and kind of show some new locations and teams instead of just the same 4 or 5 week after week. But moving on to week 3, generally a week a week with not a lot of high profile games. We'll see them kind of more bunched up as the season progresses, but really the last week of good out of conference games. So Kansas State at Mizzou, a former Big 12 matchup. Can Mizzou rise to the occasion and beat the defending Big 12 champs? That's a big addition to the resume if they can do that. Minnesota at North Carolina. So does North Carolina win against South Carolina in week 1? And if so, do they get game day to come to them when facing a quality Minnesota team? From an in-conference standpoint, LSU heads to Mississippi State this week. Can Zach Arnett fend off an LSU team that may or may not have beaten FSU this in week 1? If that's the case, that's a big matchup for Starkville. Washington at Michigan State. I know Michigan State, kind of unknown in a sense right now, not as high profile as maybe they could or want to be, but I think given the week and given the fact that Michigan State will probably be undefeated by this point, this is a good matchup. It's still a hostile environment. It's still a Pac-12 Big Ten matchup, and it's a good time for all to be had. But the number one game for me this week, and the game that I think College Gameday will go to, is a storied rivalry of two teams that do not like each other, and this home team will be looking for revenge, and that is Tennessee at Florida. So got my Gator gear on. I will be at Tennessee at Florida this year. I will be going back down to Gainesville. But, Florida was not thrilled with last year's results. Played it close, got down to the final play. But, the expectation in Gainesville is to beat Tennessee every single year. And it's time to reestablish those standards that were broken last year. So I think, I think even win or lose for Florida in that Week 1 game against Utah, the reality of Week 3 is just not particularly strong. So I think they make it down to Gainesville. Heading into Week 4, this is where we get into conference matchups everywhere. You got UCF at Kansas State. UCF's real first feature on the Big 12 landscape. How do they do going into Manhattan, Kansas, and how do they look against the defending Big 12 champs? Florida State at Clemson. I think people around the country are probably going to pick this one higher than I have, and I there's a couple of games I like more about this, but a big rivalry in the ACC, probably a precursor to your ACC championship game by a lot of people. I don't have Florida State going that far, but if you think FSU and Clemson are going to be rematching in December, this is your sneak preview into what that's going to look like. Texas at Baylor at number 3. So, again, I think Baylor is a slept-on team. Obviously, Texas is going to have their opportunities to shine, and this is one of them. Baylor is always a consistent quality opponent in the Big 12. They give people trouble, and Texas is going to have to find a way to win that game. Number 2, I have Ole Miss at Alabama. Obviously, not going back to Alabama by virtue of game day. I gave game day to Bama, Texas, but Ole Miss is going to try to do their thing, get in there and prove themselves. But the reality is it's still going to be a quality matchup. I think this Ole Miss team is going to shock a lot of people over the course of the year, and this is their opportunity to do so. But the number 1 game I have for Week 4 is Ohio State at Notre Dame, so they will be going to South Bend, Indiana. Again, it's a talented Ohio State team. It's a Notre Dame team that wants revenge, and they're looking to make a name for himself. I said earlier in this episode that I think this Notre Dame team is incredibly talented, incredibly put together, especially on offense, and I want to see how that looks against Ohio State this year. So I'm going to pick Notre Dame to host game day against Ohio State in the big game of Week 4. So moving on to Week 5, game of the week starting off in 5th. I'll do Florida at Kentucky. So again, it's been a series the last few years. Kentucky's won the last 2 after losing 30 of the last 31 or something crazy like that, 32 of the last 33. So the reality is that what was once a beatdown and what was once just would never make this list is now going to be one that we got to look at. So I think this Kentucky team is going to be good this year across the whole, but I don't know if they get it this week, but they may get it in the future. So on top of that, Baylor at UCF. So we saw UCF listed as a road team. Let's see what Game Day likes about the bounce house. This could be a fun time, and again, Baylor consistently quality over the course of the conference and of course of their schedule gets a big opportunity against a newcomer in their conference. Number 3, a place Game Day has never been, but a place that I know they've wanted to go to, Clemson at Syracuse. Syracuse gives Clemson problems just about every single year. And divisions or no divisions, I think they're going to do that again this year. Maybe Game Day does go up to Syracuse, having never been there before, and give those fans something to root for. But I think it's going to be a good game that week. I promise you that much. Number 2 is actually going to be my Game Day location because number 1 is on a Friday. But number 2, which will be my Game Day location, is LSU and Ole Miss, so they will go to the Grove this year. Again, LSU quality team, Ole Miss quality team in their own right. SEC matchup, probably going to be the CBS game, at 3:30, but big chance for all involved to kind of make that happen. And again, we'll see where LSU is at this point. If they're undefeated and Ole Miss is at maybe 1 loss, that's a big chance for everyone involved. But the game of the week that I have is going to be that Friday night game, Utah at Oregon State. Again, I am really high on Oregon State. In my Pac-12 conference preview, I had them going to the conference championship. This is a game where you make a claim. This is a game where you step up and say, I am that team. And I think they can do it. I think they can, they can host a quality opponent in Utah. They can take them to the brink, and let's see what happens. I think this is going to be the most competitive game between the 2 best teams that play each other that week. So, moving on to Week 6, we are now into October, and there's, that first week of October, there are plenty of options to pick from. I know I said Syracuse last time. Let's do Syracuse at UNC. Let's see where these teams are at this point in the year. Is Syracuse bouncing back off that Clemson game ranked higher than before, or did they get thrashed? I won't know at this point. But, it's going to be a tale of two teams for Syracuse and UNC. UNC, very high expectations this year with one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Syracuse, chippy team with a chip on their shoulder and ready to make moves for themselves. Kentucky at Georgia. I got that listed on here. I think Game Day wants to go to Athens this year to host Georgia and see what they're doing. Kentucky could be one of the few options that they have to do so, especially if Kentucky is 5-0 at this point. It could very well happen. So Kentucky at Georgia, chance to host, chance to have a pretty hot team in Kentucky against your defending champs who at this point have probably slept walk through the season. Number 3, always going to be an option. Red River, Oklahoma, Texas. I was there last year. It's one of the most unique environments that I've ever been a part of. Seeing the Cotton Bowl 50% crimson, 50% burnt orange is something to be something to take in. It's one of those last remnants of an older era of college football that we just don't see today. Like if that game was in Jerry World, it's just not the same. It's very modern and clean and chromatic, but Oklahoma and Texas, with the fair outside, is always going to be an option. I think sticking in the state of Texas, Texas Tech and Baylor, few teams that we've mentioned already at this point. I think these teams are going to be hot. I think these teams are going to play competitively everywhere across this conference and everywhere across the country. So I'm looking at Texas Tech. I'm looking at Baylor to be competitive teams this year and make this happen for themselves. They could be one loss at this point. They may be undefeated at this point. Let's see how it plays out. But two very talented teams across the state of Texas coming against each other in a good environment down there in Waco. But the game that I have as game of the week here is going to be Alabama at Texas A&M. Always a hostile environment. Kyle Field is one of the best places to watch a football game in the country. If you haven't been, highly recommend it. Bama at Texas A&M has been very close last year. Very close the year before, where A&M beat Bama in College Station, and even before that, the COVID year, like that was Texas A&M's only loss over the course of the season. So, the reality is it's two teams that, while not historic rivals, I think have built a rivalry over these last few years, and the next edition will be in College Station. And it's going to be something special. So I'm picking Alabama at Texas A&M as the game of the week. Game Day goes to College Station. I don't think they're going to do the CBS night game there, as cool as that may be, but I think it's going to be a 3:30 loud environment there and ready to make some moves. Moving into, this is week 7 now. All right, so week 7, again, conference matchups kind of across the board at this point. Kansas State at Texas Tech. Again, big conference environment between a really hot Texas Tech team probably and a K-State team that, again, defending champs, wants to be seen, wants to be prominent, and maybe can make that happen. Fourth game, I got Miami at UNC. So we haven't heard from Miami other than that Texas A&M game. I think it's a Miami team that's going to start off strong. I think their schedule was pretty backloaded, but the first half of their schedule could be, 5 or 6-1, right? So if that's the case and North Carolina is still playing on all cylinders, why not go to Chapel Hill for a highly rated matchup? Next up, Texas A&M at Tennessee. I don't think we saw Tennessee up there with Florida for that game, but we haven't seen them in Knoxville this year. So if it's Texas A&M who comes off that Bama game, so I wouldn't pick this as game day, but this could be a good option for game of the week. But I think game day wants to get up to Knoxville eventually. Maybe this is the game they picked him to get that done. So these next two are tough because the game I have as the game of the week cannot host game day per my rules. So it's somewhere we've been already. So the game day host will be Oregon at Washington. So they'll be heading to Seattle. To make that happen, it's a bitter rivalry between those two out there. Want to see game day at 6 a.m. local time where it's pitch black out. It's an awesome thing to watch. Two teams with no love lost, two teams that don't like each other and don't want good things to happen to the other. Really looking forward to seeing what that game looks like. Probably a night game as well, if I'm guessing. Well, night game on the East Coast, maybe late afternoon for Seattle. But the game of the week for me is USC at Notre Dame. I will be at USC Notre Dame this year. Very excited to see that happen, but I think game day won't go back to Notre Dame after that Ohio State game, but that does not excuse the fact that it's two rivals that, again, this is a hated rivalry. This is Caleb Williams painting his fingernails and going into South Bend. How's that going to look? Is this defense going to hold up? Is Sam Hartman going to outduel him? I don't know, but I get to see it live. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to seeing how these two teams come together and if Notre Dame can answer the call here. So we are now in week 7. Quite a few games to pick from. So just going bottom to top. Michigan State at Michigan is a real good game. Every year we'll see where Michigan State is from a record standpoint at this point. I think this is where the brakes may fall off for them, but I think it's still a very talented Michigan State team. I don't see them losing games that other people have them. I'm not writing this team off. I think they're getting to at least bowl eligibility and beyond. And a tough game against Michigan in Ann Arbor is going to be enough to prove that. Kind of see that's their measuring stick. This game, and then they have Washington. A few weeks prior. That's where they're at as a program. Clemson at Miami. So, if they don't go FSU at Clemson, maybe Clemson goes to Florida in a different capacity. Again, where is Miami at this point in the season? Where is Clemson at this point in the season? How do we make this happen? But I'm really interested and excited to see where these teams are. And I think, Miami is going to be the place to settle any sort of dispute on where they're at as a program. Number 3, I got Utah at USC. Again, it's a matchup that Utah has won twice last year alone. So beat them in Salt Lake and then beat them in Vegas. And I know USC wants revenge. I know Caleb Williams and company, they think that they're the best team out there. This is going to be a game to prove it. This is how you're going to get that done. But I'm really looking forward to seeing how that comes out. I'm really looking forward to seeing where Utah is at this point, where USC is at this point. And, maybe another West Coast, college game day. But when it comes to our final two, number 2 is where I think they'll go, but number 1 is the game of the week by virtue of the rules I've set for myself. So, College Game Day will be at Penn State at Ohio State. So they'll be in Columbus, a spot that they love. We haven't said Penn State at this point, so again, it's a pretty quiet week for them, or a pretty quiet season up till this point, which could be to their advantage. If they're a healthy, undefeated squad going into this week, and Ohio State's caught some strays along the way, this could be huge for Penn State to overcome that hump. But going to be an amazing game regardless. Two talented, athletic Big Ten teams battling it out in a hostile environment. That's all you can ask for. But the game of the week is Tennessee at Alabama. So this is the one I think is going to be the best matchup. Bama wants revenge after last year in Knoxville. Tennessee wants to establish a winning streak. And Tuscaloosa is going to be a tough place to get that done. But it was real tough between this and Penn State, Ohio State. I think Tennessee-Alabama is the better game, but they will end up at Columbus for Penn State at Ohio State. So looking past the schedule again, so this is now week 9. So this is where you may find kind of your less conventional opponents kind of taking shape, your less conventional games that maybe people are predicting. And, seeing these come into fruition. So I got Oregon and Utah at the number 5 spot. Again, this is a good looking matchup. Two teams that are going to be at the top of contention for the Pac-12. Two teams that want to battle it out before they end up in new conferences. And really at this point, we're this could be one of the games that decides who's in the driver's seat heading into November. Number 4, another classic, Florida, Georgia. World's largest outdoor cocktail party. I don't know where Florida is going to be at this point in the season. Georgia should be undefeated if we're speaking candidly, but it's really all going to depend on where Florida's at. If they've made strides in year 2 of Billy Napier, then maybe game day heads over to Jacksonville because that's a different location than Gainesville. That's okay. We can pick multiple spots, but always going to be a tough game. Always going to be an exciting game, and probably one of the last times you'll see Florida on this list for the rest of the season. I'm going to skip number 3 because I think that's where game day will go by virtue of rules that I've set for myself. So number 2, I've got Pitt at Notre Dame. Can't go back to Notre Dame because they've already been there for Ohio State game. But if you watch my ACC conference video, I'm high on Pitt. I think they're a talented team, and they're going to be in the race for the ACC championship the entire year. Get a true road test at Notre Dame to see if they're ready to overcome the obstacles and make that happen. Number 1 is the game of the week by virtue of I don't do teams in back-to-back weeks, but this is Ohio State at Wisconsin. So they will not go to Madison by virtue of we saw Ohio State last week. So with that in mind, I think Ohio State is a super talented team. I think Wisconsin takes a big step in year 1 with Luke Fickell. If you watched my Big Ten Conference video, you know that I have Wisconsin as my conference champ, and this is the exclamation point that they're going to need to make that happen. So it's going to be a talented game. That may be big noon kickoff if we're being honest. So we get it first thing in the morning, kind of make that happen. But the game of the week that I have is, or the game day location of this week is Tennessee at Kentucky. So they'll head to Lexington. Again, I think this is a good Kentucky team. I think this is a team that's going to give a lot of teams problems, and they're going to be rewarded by a chance to host College Gameday. So if they can, eclipse Tennessee there and end up in maybe the number 2 spot in the East, they're going to be in a good spot heading into 2024. And this is a game that will help prove where they are as a program heading into November. So, all right, we are now in week 10, if I'm mistaken, right? 10, 11, 12, 13, yes. So the final 4 weeks of the season. All right, week 10, we got Florida State at Pitt. I think this is a great matchup. Again, where is FSU at this point, and where is Pitt at this point? Pitt made their first entrance in the on this list last week. Florida State we've seen a few times. Did Florida State win all those games? Did Pitt win everything up till this point? We're going to find out, and I think this is going to be a tough matchup. I think it's one that maybe people are looking over. I think people sleep on Pitt this year, and I think they're going to be surprised when they pull out a pretty impressive team. Next up, we got TCU at Texas Tech. So again, 2 of the teams sticking in the Big 12, and 2 teams that are looking to make a name for themselves this season. TCU coming off that national championship appearance. Texas Tech looking to capitalize on a lot of hype around them right now. And, where else to do it but against each other and over in Lubbock. Next up is Washington at USC. Again, 2 of these teams with elite quarterbacks. 2 teams that are heading off to the Big Ten at the end of this year and ready to make some noise on the way out. So both of these teams, we all know, want to take the crown with them wherever they end up. But, I think it's going to be a spectacular matchup any way that you dice it. So our final 2, this next one will be where game day goes by virtue of number 1 has a previous location, but Notre Dame at Clemson. So we haven't seen Clemson host at this point this year. They didn't get the FSU game earlier. They're going to get Notre Dame this year, so going to be a huge matchup. Going to be, the game last year more or less ruined Clemson's season out there in Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat them, gave them that loss, and then when they dropped South Carolina a few weeks later, that was a wrap. It was over for Clemson. But Clemson wants revenge. They want it in Death Valley, and they want to make a name for themselves out of conference. So all of that combined with the Notre Dame team that has a huge chip on their shoulder as always, and you're due for a great early November matchup with playoff implications. But the game that I have at number one that will not host game day, but is going to be a night game most likely in a rough environment, and that's LSU at Alabama. It's a game I'll be attending, so I'll be in Tuscaloosa for this one. I cannot wait to see how this comes together. Never been to Bryant-Denny. Want to see what this vibe is like, what this environment's like, and I love seeing LSU lose on top of it if that's what's going to happen. So all of that said, LSU last year, took that game in overtime against Alabama, did what they needed to do, and now Alabama wants revenge. All these people sleep on Alabama. That's when Saban beats you. I don't know why people keep doing this. They keep, this is the year the dynasty ends. Like, this is when Saban pulls a trick up his sleeve that he we don't know he has, and he goes 12-0. Like, we've seen this story before. Stop giving it ammunition. But LSU at Alabama is going to be a huge matchup. This is probably my game of the year when you really get down to it. This is probably going to be the best game of the year on paper, and I'm going to see it in person. I can't wait to see that happen. So heading into Week 11, we're almost at the end here. We've got Utah at Washington. Again, another huge Pac-12 matchup that will have conference and playoff implications. So Utah is going to be in the thick of it. Heading into Week 11, Washington will be in the thick of it, and very interested to see how that comes together for these teams. You got Bama at Kentucky. Obviously we won't go there by virtue of Kentucky has hosted already. Bama hosted, or Bama was featured. Bama has hosted already too. Washington did in the last game too, but we're running out of host sites if we're looking at game over game. So Bama at Kentucky. Kentucky's going to be in a good spot by this point in the season in my eyes. Bama riding off the momentum of or lack thereof of that LSU game, and looking to continue and or rebound against Kentucky the week after on the road. And I think it's going to be a more challenging time than they've probably had there in the past. And really looking forward to seeing how Bama adapts to that type of environment. And we're going to see how Kentucky faces down a team that has such a huge talent advantage over them. You got Texas at TCU. So Texas on their way out of the conference, heading over to SEC after this year, and TCU wants to play spoiler to them. This was a hell of a game last year, and I know there's bad blood between these teams, and interested to see how it comes together this year. Who wins that matchup before that series ends? So who gets the final bragging rights? Number 2, Ole Miss at Georgia. So this was the other one I thought Georgia could host, and I'm picking one game above it, which means they got close to it. But again, I think Ole Miss is going to surprise some folks. Georgia obviously is probably sleepwalking through their schedule at this point, and ready to take on a tough opponent, get their get their teeth into something and play a tough game. And Ole Miss is going to bring it to them. But the game that I'm picking as your game of the week and your host of College Game Day is Michigan at Penn State. So they will be heading to State College. This may be a noon game on Fox. I hope it's not. I hope it's a night game. It's just a different environment up there. But if it is a noon game, it's still going to be a tough place to play for Michigan. It's going to be a real challenge for them. And, it's going to give Penn State an opportunity to potentially play spoiler in their division and, make it to their conference championship game. I predicted that they would go to the conference championship. I didn't say who they'd beat to get there, but beating Michigan would be a big stepping stone for them to make that happen. All right, so heading into week 12, almost at the end of the season, the second to last week here. So right before rivalry week, we have Minnesota at Ohio State. Haven't seen Minnesota in a while, but I think they're due for a pretty consistent season. I think they're due for I think they're due for another strong season from their offense and their defense. And Ohio State is going to have to make some moves to play up to that level in a sense, especially if they've slept walk since that Wisconsin game, which I hope they haven't. But Minnesota is going to be a good barometer test heading into the Michigan game as well. It's a talented opponent before your arch rival, so you're not getting lazy before your biggest game of the year. Number 4, I got the game that I think people are going to have higher on their list than mine personally. Georgia at Tennessee. I know Gameday would love to get to Knoxville. I don't think they get it through this game. Really going to depend on where Georgia and Tennessee are in the season. But I think there's a few more intriguing games above this that that can make that happen. But still going to be an amazing matchup. Still going to be that 3:30 game that everyone's watching, and interested to see where either team is at this point in the season. Number 3, I got UNC at Clemson. So again, where is Clemson at this point? Where is UNC at this point? If they've beaten everyone ahead of them, UNC Clemson very well could be a game they play 2 weeks later in Charlotte. But this is going to be that test for both teams. Is it can Clemson's defense stop Drake May? Can Cade Klubnik come alive against a UNC defense that struggled last year? We'll find out in week 12 here. Number 2, I got Washington at Oregon State. Again, I am super high on Oregon State. Washington is going to be in the thick of the Pac-12 playoff picture going into the second to last week of the season. And, I think all of us emotionally feel for what Oregon State is going through as a program, knowing that they don't really have a conference next year. Wouldn't it be great if they took everyone down? This would be awesome. I'm rooting for Oregon State. I'm rooting for Washington State this year just due to how the conference picture is played out. But going to be a huge environment there in out in Corvallis, and interested to see if they come together against Washington. But the game of the week I've got, we haven't featured our defending champs yet, but let's feature our defending runner-ups. I don't know if you can, I don't know if that's a real phrase, but Baylor at TCU, two teams that hate each other, two teams with a long-standing rivalry against each other, and a real chance to, make a splash before, the last week of the season. This could have playoff disruptor possibilities, or this could be a make or break game for their conference championship spot. And the fact that it's so close to the end of the season means the stakes are all that higher. There's not too many chances to rebound after this. You lose this, you may not make the playoff, you may not make the conference championship game. You can't rely on yourself anymore, you got to rely on others. So I think game day goes out to TCU, goes out to Fort Worth. Maybe that's a big noon kickoff, maybe it's not, but still going to be a great time regardless. And the final week of the season, we are now in week 13. I think we all know where game day is going, but we'll get there eventually. So I got Texas A&M at LSU as the number 5 game. Again, Texas A&M playing spoiler to LSU last year, ruining their chances at going to the playoffs, and as a result of that, causing a little bit of disruption around the SEC as a whole. I know LSU is going to want revenge in Baton Rouge and wants to make that happen, and Texas A&M, depending on where they are in the season, they may be feeling themselves and in a good spot to play spoiler again. We got Wisconsin at Minnesota. This is one of those classic Big Ten rivalries. It's the essence of what makes college football special, and I love the fact that in Week 13, these two teams, at least in my eyes, will be good enough to potentially host game day and potentially host, not Big Noon because of what's coming next, but it really like makes me happy knowing that this is a real possibility. Um, Gotta like those Midwestern rivalries that kind of come together that way, and this is one of the best. Number 3, we got Texas Tech at Texas. If I'm not mistaken, this is a Friday game. So, with that in mind, I could be wrong, but again, it's two teams that do not like each other. One's on the way out, one's staying put, and they're going to want bragging rights to end this series. So, how does it end? Who ends up on top? We'll find out in Austin in week 13. Next up, TCU at Oklahoma. So again, I'm high on Oklahoma. I think they're gonna win the conference championship. I think Oklahoma is in the driver's seat. But the week before conference championship, they have a real challenge in TCU, and TCU could be the one to play spoiler for a playoff chance if that's what's going to happen. Oklahoma, I think their schedule is pretty easy, which is a benefit to them. They really only have a few tough games, and most if not all of them are at home. So TCU constitutes one of those games, and I'm really interested to see what the fallout is from this game and who ends up where as a result. But finally, game of the week for week 13, rivalry week. There's really only one location right now that can do it. It's Ann Arbor, Michigan for the game, Ohio State at Michigan. Michigan has won 2 straight against Ohio State. Ryan Day's feeling the pressure. Ohio State's feeling the pressure. This is going to have playoff implications, Big Ten implications. The whole landscape of college football is going to be, watching Fox at noon to make this happen. But, I'm very, very curious as to what that end result looks like. Does Michigan take 3 in a row? Does Ohio State break the streak? Time will tell. But a lot of great games coming up over the course of the season. We are so close to the start of the season, and I can't wait to see any and all of these games over the course of the year and what they end up looking like. And the games that I didn't list off. I'm sure there's games I missed. I'm sure there's games that you don't agree should be on there that I left off. But that's the beauty of this all, that until that season starts, we don't know who anyone looks like. We don't know who's good, who's not until that kickoff. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in tonight. Next episode is really just going to be week 0 preview. We're almost here, but on top of it, I'm going to do a top 25 preview next week. I'm going to do a little different than what we see elsewhere. I'm going to do I got a twist on my top 25. It's a little bit different, but we are so close to the finish line here. So thank you all for tuning in. Hope you're getting excited. I know I am, and tune in next week.